Part 39. Online game Dungeon Master. Author, Bulletin Lau Bulletin Si Bulletin Me. Chapter 381. Each dungeon lord has a legendary experience. They have experienced countless wars and hardships and stood on the top of the pyramid again and again. On the contrary, the players in the surface world live a comfortable life and yearn for war and conquest in their hearts. Even if they have common goals and beliefs, their experiences cannot give them the capital to do so. The underground world is a term that countless lords hate and yearn for. For players, their territories have more or less experienced the harassment of dungeon lords. They have reasons to hate, and they pursue the adventures of heroes sung by wandering poets. They don't want such a world of richness and poverty to be forgotten by people. However, if they really step into this land abandoned by God, many players will be discouraged. Even the real nobles in the empire find it difficult to have the confidence and strength to occupy it. The only way they can achieve it is to unite to make up for their fear of the unknown world. Therefore, when the young people around the emperor proposed to expedition underground, this proposal was approved and supported by the Eye of Judgment. The Eye of Judgment also has an ulterior motive. In the ruins of the desolate city, where demons are rampant, the ascetics from the church headquarters are looking for something related to the future day and night, without revealing any information or clues. The players in the surface world cannot get it, and the players in the underground world are the same. Ryan and Calicos in the desolate city also don't know what secrets in the desolate city are worth the Eye of Judgment's efforts. All they want to do is to expel the players in the surface world and give them an unforgettable lesson. In terms of war, the surface players are naturally not as strong as the underground players who grew up in the war. The old Ryan talked freely and communicated with dozens of players below, as if the whole war was controlled by them. It sounds a bit absurd, but it is true. The underground world should not be a place for surface players to play and make money. The sand table-like battlefield map was placed in the center of the tent. Ryan gently pinched it, and the sand flowing on his fingertips solidified and stagnated, turning into a vivid stronghold. A small flag was inserted on each stronghold, symbolizing a player. The player's task is to capture it and maintain the dignity of being a dungeon lord. Unfortunately, I tell you that the nobles on the surface are preparing to leave the desolate city for a new battlefield in a few days. Our chances in these few days, Ryan said. In his opinion, every enemy who dared to invade the desolate city must pay a price. The enemy's desire to leave does not mean that he can get rid of the guild. As a marquis, he cannot tolerate his interests being damaged. There are also players present who do not want to fight. For them, the Spell Academy, known as the Cradle of Talents, naturally cannot give any support to the local area. The role of education is slow, but it does not mean that someone will ignore it. So, when the tasks were assigned, it was finally Shen Xian's turn. "Lord, you are late." Ryan walked to Shen Xian with a teasing tone. "Do you think that what desolate city can give you is not worthy of being your ally?" Shen Xian did not see sheep. The Earl of the Fallen Temple was wandering between the terror of the devil and the freedom of the South, wavering. He did not find a few famous players. The more famous they are, the more extraordinary their insights are. Sometimes the participation of a swarm of players may not be the work of masters. He replied, "Not everyone has endless time to waste." Ryan pretended not to hear and handed him a task without any courtesy. Shen Xian sighed and opened the task description and read it carefully. Twilight City will face Freedom, an old rival of the surface forces. They will kick off the battle on the southeast defense line, rushing all the way to block the enemy's way, and the personal reward is 120 million experience and 5,000 reputation. The main force of the enemy was dealt with by the reinforcements of the Fallen Temple and the desolate city. The surrounding strongholds were handled and encircled by the players. The scattered divine servants around the desolate city were the responsibility of a large number of adventurers. The capture of the desolate city on the surface was done quite well, and the retreat was relatively hasty, which also gave Ryan an opportunity to satisfy his desire for revenge. There is at most an hour before the battle officially begins. In the southeast corner of the underground plain, a group of black purebred horses imported from the surface world were ridden by blood knights. These knights wearing red armor did not have the enthusiasm that knights should have. Their pupils were lifeless and fake, as if they were carved from crystal, and their whole bodies also exuded the chill that only the northern ice field had. The knights were ready to go and galloped on the unchanging plain. There were not many regular battles in the underground world, and the knights had few opportunities to ride horses, but today, in order to buy time, the knights all got on the horses. Elsewhere, the Freedom Army was heading towards the nearest dark passage with the precious treasures taken away from the desolate city. Compared to the dwarves, the spoils of the desolate city might not be that valuable, but they were much richer in variety. There were paintings of famous artists collected for countless centuries, as well as the last works of dwarf masters on their deathbed, and even family secrets that could not be found in the Imperial Library. The underground world is always a magical world. When Spearman elegantly raised the telescope made by the dwarves to peek into the distance and found the army of Dusk City, and learned that they were blocked by Dusk City, the guild immediately seemed a little panicked. As for the commanders, Batman and others were helpless as they watched the cavalry approaching quickly from far away. The army escorting the treasure only accounted for 1/10 of Freedom's troops, and 9/10 were still gathering and dealing with the war, which could not help them. Although the opportunity was seized by Twilight City, it did not mean that Freedom would give up. Following them were 30,000 Judgment Eye Church army. As long as they waited for them, the guild could fight with the fast but insufficient Twilight City army. The army abnormally walked back instead of the dark passage. A perfect swift scroll saved the lives of countless players and NPCs. Although the convoy carrying the treasure was slow, it kept running with the help of the power of spells. There was still a distance between the two sides. As long as they persisted, a different ending would be waiting for them. The Blood Knights passed by, and they did not take any measures. If no one was there, they would go straight to the dark passage farther away. A total of 23,000 Blood Knights, the two subsequent elites, plus the Wizard Corps and the Swordsman Corps, firmly blocked the intersection leading to the light. No one knows whether they can go back. At this rate, freedom alone is not enough. Should they reunite with the expeditionary force or find a new way out? The Elders of Freedom are confused. Online game Dungeon Master. Author, Bulletin Lau Bulletin Si Bulletin Me. Chapter 382. The brief contact ended with Twilight City safely overwhelmed the army of the Freedom Guild, with no casualties, but in terms of morale, Freedom has fallen behind. Freedom, whose members mostly come from the United States, is full of practical people. They believe that they cannot find a new way out, but they believe that the guild elders need to do something. Batman, Spider-Man, a series of elders ending with the String Man discussed for a long time without any results. Without an army to use, their life and death are in the hands of the believers who believe in God, and they are naked profit-oriented. It is extremely difficult to deal with them. The main force of freedom is still stationed in the desolate city. The enemy that Shen Xian has to face is not a real guild. When the Blood Knights settled down in a wide area with dappled sunlight, after a while, the scouts reported that the Judgment Eye soldiers were marching towards this place. A 20,000-man religious corps is not enough. The average level is only 25, which is even weaker than the large regular army of the Pharaoh Empire. It belongs to the category of militia. The other 12,000-man sanction knights are what need to be taken seriously. With an average level of 50 and a huge number, both sides are fanatical believers. Once the war starts, no one can tell when it will end. Competing with surface players in numbers is what underground players dislike the most. In the open plains, cities can easily develop to hundreds of thousands of people and have tens of thousands of troops. This is not the case underground. The land that is fought for, every inch of land, must also face frequent terrain changes. The heavy difficulties hinder the expansion of the underground city. Shen Xian will not simply fight the Eye of Judgment directly. There are still dozens of minutes before the Swordsman Corps and the Wizard Corps. He has enough time to set up certain traps. The enemy seems powerful, but there is a weakness: the commander is an NPC. In today's highly developed artificial intelligence, although the AI in the kingdom can reach a level similar to that of God, in order to prevent players from feeling too difficult, the AI of NPCs will not be so abnormal as to have both the accuracy and speed of computers and the logic and association of humans. In addition, the NPCs in the kingdom are products of the medieval background and will not have the advanced thinking of players. They have not been trained by players. Therefore, most NPCs in the church are old-fashioned and stubborn, and firmly believe that God can lead them to victory. The wide passages divided into several lanes are full of blood knights. The world is shrouded in darkness created by artificial destruction. Under their feet is a deep red trap. As the blood seeps into the earth, it slowly disappears, forming a triangular mark and turning into a completed spell barrier. The Blood Knight is busy releasing the buff state for himself. Shen Xian opens the halo. Before the battle, everyone seems nervous and busy. Half an hour later, the great lord of the Eye of Judgment, Haina, rode over on a golden dragon, followed by a whole team of heavy armored knights who gave people a sense of security like a barrier. Their plate armor was all composite, with a special structure, and even the skirt armor, which was a weak point of protection, was well protected, which meant that the knights of sanctions they faced had extremely strong physical defense. No one could ignore Haina, the leader of the 8th Knights of the Eye of Judgment, in the front. He was wearing equipment that could be called a work of art, and was known as a man who was suitable to be the dream lover of many noble ladies. He rode a huge golden dragon. Among the 3 good dragons, the golden dragon was inferior to the platinum dragon and superior to the silver dragon. Compared with the graceful and smooth curves of the silver dragon, the golden dragon was more fierce, with bulging muscles and spirited eyes, revealing the pride of the overlord. The narrow underground space could not stop the solid body of the golden dragon. With bursts of pattering sounds, dust fell. The passage strangely remained stable, without collapse or cracking. It was not until he left that the fallen rocks rolled down in large areas. As a high-ranking member of the Eye of Judgment, Haina is obviously a leader in the church full of powerful people. He is level 130, and no one has reached it so far except for the players who have been deified. If the Inquisition is a sword used by the church to judge heretics in peacetime, the several major knight groups affiliated with the church are a major support for the gods to interfere in the secular world in wartime. In the Pharaoh Empire, the monarchy and theocracy are equally divided, and a delicate balance is maintained in the military, so that neither side can perfectly suppress the other. 12,000 level 50 Sanction Knights, 800 level 60 Instruction Knights, and 400 level 65 Holy Grail Knights are the enemies that Shen Xian needs to face. A strong oppression, from the incompatibility of justice and evil, the holy power condensed by each knight through years of hard work makes the Blood Knight feel angry and hateful. In contrast, the knights who take it as their responsibility to eliminate evil also have a solemn face. The earth is a dark land, where the holy light cannot shine. Shen Xian is in the place where the gods come in person. It is full of the characteristics of the underground city, which cannot survive in the surface world. Haina waved the demon-killing spear Kungus, which had pierced 189 big demons, and charged the enemy. 20,000 innocent soldiers who were used as cannon fodder ran up like driven civilians, wearing simple equipment and taking messy steps. If it weren't for the reverence for God shining in their pure eyes, I'm afraid no one would believe that they are an army used by the Eye of Judgment for war. Each Blood Knight held a sword that had killed people and stained blood and faced the enemy resolutely. Even if it was not convenient to ride with a sword, with the combination of talent and skills, the sword of the Blood Knight was incomparable to the gun. The Blood Knights did not charge. Knights without charging were no different from infantry. The faces of the soldiers showed joy. After a few seconds, a stream of flying blood mists rose up and filled the battlefield, causing the passing soldiers to burst their flesh and blood and fall down quickly. The evil spread, and the knights used divine arts to protect their bodies and remained in an uninvaded state. The high-level knights were busy purifying. After more than 10 seconds, the Blood Knights pressed over. Hyena was fighting Tujukan. The Dragon Knight was a tank on the battlefield. Regardless of whether Tujukan, level 112, could defeat him, it was enough to contain him. On the front battlefield, the Blood Knights of about level 40 who received attribute bonuses fought desperately. They had the special features of the underground world and could use some skills to attack people's vital points, which was very different from the Knights of the Eye of Judgment. The players below became proficient after a year with Shen Xian. They ordered small teams to surround and fight, and from time to time they used limited scrolls to do ruthless things. The Judgment Knights rely on a reasonable combination of professions, with the leader being the Instruction Knight, the Adjutant and Healer being the Holy Grail Knight, and the Soldier being the Punishment Knight. The majority of them allow them to persist for a while. Although they know that there is a support force in Twilight City, and the 8th Knights are followed by a limited army of freedom, at least in the short term, the battle situation cannot be determined. More updates tomorrow, no more today. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Online game Dungeon Master. Author, Buledin Lao Buledin Si Buledin Me. Chapter 383. The horrific war continued in the ancient underground. The bloody bodies of the Blood Knights fell one after another. With the belief of abandoning life and death, their bodies were an insurmountable barrier. Even if the opponent symbolized goodness, in the underground world, goodness was always the first reason for a person to die. The battle between Hyena and Tujukan was inextricable. The furious body of the Golden Dragon kept making the soldiers around him walk around in fear. What was even more terrifying was that the body of the Golden Dragon was like a battering ram, and even the space could not maintain a stable state. The Dusk City blocked a passage for the surface forces to leave the underground, which was also the largest passage. It was likely to be blocked in other places, but not here. No one could stop it. The goddess of dawn in the myth left a masterpiece in order to preserve a door to the underground world for the pioneers. However, today, things were not as simple as imagined. The teachers of the Eye of Judgment encountered arduous resistance at the beginning. The Blood Knights on the opposite side firmly sealed the exit, which made the teachers who could not see the light feel panic and confusion. Sara, the deputy leader of the 8th Knights, rushed out. He was an old man who had experienced many battles. Unfortunately, he was shamelessly lured into the Blood Knights by Shadow Dragon's reckless tactics and was hunted to death by Shen Xian and others. Then came more soldiers. During the more than 10 minutes of contact between the two sides, hundreds of bodies fell at each passage. The Blood Knights did not suffer many casualties. Their attack and defense were not outstanding, but they were quite good at protracted warfare. The player's command level was not much different from that of the training knights, but the underground world was the home of Dusk City, so after 20 minutes, the Blood Knights only paid the price of more than a dozen deaths and nearly 1,000 injuries, leaving more than 2,000 bodies to the teaching soldiers. The 8th Knights had no casualties. The reinforcements of both sides were approaching. The sound of the earth could be heard, and the whistling valley wind stimulated the fragile hearts of the players. Freedom adjusted the formation, placing the looted treasure at the rear of the army, with 3,000 elite soldiers in front. Looking at the previous battles, the main forces of both sides did not officially collide. Batman and other veterans of Freedom can already see the changes in the Blood Knights through the casualties of the Blood Knights. The sum of the buffs of each Blood Knight is almost equivalent to 50% of the attribute. In this way, a level 40 Blood Knight can defeat 3 or 4 enemies of the same level. Interested players can use this to calculate what kind of equipment the opponent has in his hands. The only place where information can be leaked is the ranking list. The items on the ranking list can be browsed for their rough attributes and the power they control. By reversely inferring the changes in attributes, players can know what the opponent has brought. Batman sighed, with envy on his face, a total of 11 epic items and 3 legendary items. Dusk City is indeed so rich. Even if we Freedom want to have such a luxurious lineup, it is not easy. It is indeed more profitable to always participate in NPC tasks. What should we do? Should we quickly catch up and kill all the commanders of the Lord? Spider-Man was still extremely impulsive. It can be seen that the key to the strength of the soldiers of Dusk City lies in the equipment. As long as the commander is killed, the strength of the army will immediately decrease. However, in order to achieve this, special methods must be used. Spider-Man is still a little jealous. If he has such gorgeous equipment, how awesome his army will be. Although the death of the Kingdom players will not explode all the equipment, at least a few pieces will be dropped. In this way, the death of the Lord who is covered with epic and legendary equipment will contribute a lot of equipment to them, just like the boss. Just as they watched and saw the army of Dusk City approaching and the cannon fodder soldiers of the Eye of Judgment were killed and injured, the Eighth Knights also began to show their power. As the number 1 church on the continent, the knights trained by the church are naturally extremely powerful. The holy power in their bodies can protect them from many negative states. The armor is a level 60 excellent suit. Except for not riding horses, it is far better than the Blood Knights. On average, 1 Sanction Knight can deal with 2 Blood Knights, but war is not a simple numbers game, and it is far from enough to rely on data competition. After half an hour, hundreds of Blood Knights fell, and there was no gap. The soldiers of the Eighth Knights were still shrouded in darkness. Taking advantage of the gap between the attacks of the innocent, Shen Xian took a breath. The innocent can cause more than 20,000 damage to Hina at a time. The problem is that if he keeps attacking him, he will turn to attack himself. After all, the underground world is not a bloody battle. You can leave things to the bottom. It is not feasible to use the same method for 2 places. He glanced at the simple messages posted by players on the internet, such as how many achievements the adventurer players have made, and how many players of the surface forces other players have defeated, and found that the general momentum is towards the underground. The surface world was retreating, so naturally, there was no choice but to fight hastily. Just like Shen Xian was blocking the intersection, the Eighth Knights had to choose to attack them or be chased by the players behind them. The knights who believed in justice naturally chose to attack Shen Xian. Use their bodies to pave a road to light. Unfortunately, their ideas were too simple. The knights in the church who believed in the 8 virtues dedicated their lives to the Almighty God. They would not be as cowardly as the church soldiers, but they did not understand the insidiousness of the underground world. After holding out for nearly an hour, the army of the surface world was blocked outside. Reinforcements arrived. Along a secret passage through the second underground floor, the 2 legions of more than 20,000 troops appeared in the knight's field of vision. Hina could sense the approach of evil, but could not determine the exact number. When he released his skills, he realized that they were not fighting against the enemy's main force at all. The army, twice the number of the Eye of Judgment, tightly surrounded them from 2 sides, including Freedom. Freedom did not do it on purpose. They just wanted to get a piece of the pie and did not stay too far away. They knew the army of Dusk City, but did not know where they would appear. The surface forces knew the map of Desolate City at the beginning, but did not know that due to natural changes, the map of the underground area might change several times a year. The Elders of Freedom quarreled, thinking of the losses caused by the looting of the items protected by the convoy, and hurriedly ordered the players to put the items on their bodies to avoid being dropped. On the other side, the battle officially began. For the first time, the knights who believed in God discovered that there was evil in the darkness that they could not defeat, and they showed a look of fear for the first time. Online game Dungeon Master. Author, Bulletin Lau Bulletin Si Bulletin Me. Chapter 384. The members of Freedom were talking about it. The enemy's elusiveness obviously made them angry and helpless. To give a brief explanation, the exit of the Dark Passage is in the southwest corner of the desolate city area. The Blood Knights are in the west, with the 8th Knights in the middle. The Freedom team followed behind, and the army responsible for the escort was in the northernmost position. The location where the Wizard group and the Swordsman group suddenly appeared was east of Freedom, which dealt a heavy blow to the team without any protection. The desolate city was in their northeast, and the army would generally advance in a straight line, which meant that the attack should come from their north, but the facts were completely different from what several players imagined. Freedom's limited manpower made it impossible for them to defend in all directions and escape from the Eye of Judgment, otherwise they would be drowned in darkness. The inferior demons used as cannon fodder in front blocked Freedom's way very well. Freedom's formation made it impossible for them to use the method of speeding up their movement to quickly escape. The 4 directions of southeast, northwest, and northeast were blocked, unless they were underground. If they were asked to go underground where they had no confidence at all, they would probably encounter dead ends and monsters. So, the Freedom players made such an incomprehensible decision. There was no way to resist. They had no soldiers to use and could only rely on the Eye of Judgment. After the inferior demons were dispersed by the players who fought a desperate battle, the Swordsman group officially charged. One by one, the swordsmen exuding a dark aura quickly inserted into the inferior demons, using the inferior demons to contain the enemy and wait for an opportunity to attack. This is a new combination, using the advantage of meat shields to create a certain attack distance. As their own swordsmen, they can flexibly pull in and out, but the enemy cannot. The 2 sides are in a dense formation. In this area with a maximum point of only 30 meters, the mage will not easily launch advanced spells. The 2 sides cooperated in an orderly manner. The inferior demons, known as cannon fodder, could withstand 2 or 3 attacks from the enemy under the influence of attribute bonus. Undoubtedly, the Freedom convoy collapsed quickly. The dead players had happiness on their faces, and the players who were not dead hurriedly picked up the drops of the players around them to minimize the losses. The loss of level can be basically ignored. In a large-scale war, there is no difference between an army of level 49 and an army of level 50. Most players have not reached level 100, so leveling is quite convenient. The convoy collapsed, and the 3,000 guards could not hold out for long in front of an army 10 times larger. The wizards did not go out. They were preparing a spell, a skill equivalent to level 13 magic, which requires half an hour of preparation time. After more than 20 minutes, Freedom's army was cleared out. Except for a few thieves and rangers who were agile and unrestricted, Freedom's convoy was not spared. Of course, because of Freedom's reasonable response measures, Dusk City actually did not get anything, such as jewelry and potions. These small things were almost all taken away by the light of the player's rebirth. The Swordsman group joined the battlefield, and the pressure on the Blood Knights was slightly reduced. When the Swordsman group and the Sanction Knights came into contact, a large number of church soldiers were diverted away. The offensive power of the Swordsman group is the leader in melee combat. Although it is not as fierce as the Warhammer, it is better in attack speed. A swordsman who has practiced swordsmanship and fighting spirit for many years is a great threat to the knight, especially the knight has no horse to ride and no distance to charge. In the case of single combat, the knight is not more advantageous than the swordsman. 15 minutes later, the latest casualties were counted. The Blood Knights suffered more than 3,000 casualties, the swordsmen were more than 1,000, and the Sanction Knights who fell in the Eye of Judgment were more than 1,000. Horn, the commander of the Swordsman Corps, eliminated more than 10 Knights of Punishment alone, and even eliminated several accompanying priests, making great contributions. Several other high-level players also achieved considerable results, with the most eliminating more than 20 enemies. Without the full support of the Wizard Corps, Shen Xian felt that it was remarkable to reach this level. After all, it was the 8th Knights of the Eye of Judgment. Next, it was time for the Wizard Corps to play a role. In addition to summoning tens of thousands of inferior demons, in the battle just now, the Wizard Corps did not release curses or use destruction spells to attack the opponent. In the long silence, a thick black fog quietly covered the entire battlefield. Knight Corps leader Heine smelled a trace of uneasy breath. After fighting with Tu Jukan for a long time, his health value dropped below 1 million. Of course, it was still safe enough for him. He was not a fragile mage, and even the most terrible weapons in the world could hardly hurt him. He also has a golden dragon. The wise dragon has carried him away from the battlefield to a safe place many times when he was on the verge of death. Years of Dragon Knight career have established mutual trust between Heine and the golden dragon. However, the sticky rotten blood that permeates the surroundings slowly erodes their holiness. Not only that, the passage that can reach the surface a few kilometers ahead has begun to change. Is it an illusion? It is definitely not a simple illusion. The knights with devout faith are given a pair of eyes that can see through falsehood by the gods. Although Heine can still find the wrong, the punishment knights around him can't do it. The passage twisted and stretched, as if it extended infinitely without an end. The knights did not realize that it was like this. The feet were crawling with magic maggots that were even lower than the inferior demons, followed by dense demons. The battlefield turned into a cage, a maze, and the Blood Knights were not affected. To summarize in simple words, the Sanction Knight encountered various negative states such as deceleration, poisoning, and blasphemy. In it, the Holy Spirit cannot protect them, and they cannot resist in front of the 13th level spell. The battlefield that was only a few hundred meters wide turned into a space of tens of kilometers, like a purgatory corridor hanging over the top of the pinnacle fortress, becoming the best gift from the dungeon masters. This is a dark spell with some illusion characteristics, but its essence is still the result of the wizard's research. When he was finally freed from Ryan's clutches, Shen Xian was surprised to find that Miss Linda had reached the hero level. A new growth, coupled with the girl's level, makes her growth quite abnormal. 4 or 5 capable demons are all level 100. After being strengthened with various talents, they are enough to kill a large group of Sanction Knights. Mist Aaron is the guide and core of the entire large-scale spell. With the help of the rules contained in ancient texts, she gathers the magic power of the mages to strengthen the effect of the spell. Her faint and slender figure was suspended in the air, her face was obviously young, and her body seemed to be stained with blood from countless killings. Finally, her finger pointed to the battlefield in the distance, turning the energy of the spell into a boundless illusory world. After sufficient preparations have been made and there is no interference from freedom players, the final fate of the 8th Knights has been decided. Online game Dungeon Master. Author, Buledin Lau Buledin Si Buledin Me. Chapter 385. The desolate city camp, where nearly 200,000 troops are stationed, is the base camp for surface players to attack the desolate city. After capturing the desolate city, the troops could not stay in the city for a long time due to the corrupted barrier, so they used it as a base to start a tug-of-war with the underground forces. For several days, while looking for a secret under the supervision of the Eye of Judgment, they used the troops to attack and defend each other, accumulating enough reputation and merits in exchange for their capital for promotion. However, as the number of participants in the underground increased and the search work was nearing its end, the lords had to speed up their return under the emperor's order. It was at this time that the war situation took a historic turn. First, the underground forces mobilized the army to attack the camp, and then the army of Dusk City blocked the dark passage to leave and wiped out the 8th Knights. The underground world's reaction was amazingly fast. In addition, after a period of integration of the underground forces, the number and quality of the troops sent out to fight have been improved, and the surface players who basically could not get supplies underground were suppressed again and again. There were 50,000 cannon fodder soldiers and nearly 150,000 elite soldiers stationed in the camp, while the desolate city only sent out an army equivalent to 2/3 of their strength. Even so, due to the harassment of other players, the surface players had a good start, but it was difficult to put a perfect end to the war. On the first day of the war, Dusk City sent 45,000 troops to intercept the convoys of the 8th Knights and Freedom, and won a great victory. The big devils and adventurers deployed by the desolate city destroyed the main force of the Korean lineage, and dozens of divine servants summoned by the priests of the Eye of Judgment scattered around the desolate city. The aggressive momentum gave many players a headache. Of course, if possible, they hoped to get rid of it quickly. Compared with the south, the underground forces in the north are backed by the fallen temple, not the city alliance established by several outstanding leaders in the south. Now is a peaceful era, so the horror of the Dark Age cannot be seen. As long as you read history, you will find that every time the fallen temple stretches out its claws, the whole world turns red. As for whether there are players who can trigger it, no one can guess. As you can imagine, if it is triggered, it will be a world mission that will completely return the main material plane to its original state. A row of soldiers in bright silver armor guarded the tents, and more than a dozen participating lords stood around. Superman was one of the few remaining elders of freedom. He stood at the outermost edge and was responsible for hosting the meeting. "Report the latest progress," he said to the scout captain below. The elven scout immediately bowed and made a polite gesture before starting to narrate. First, the southwest area, Dusk City currently has 80,000 troops stationed there, including 2 Blood Knights, 2 swordsmen, a wizard group and a cry player group. Judging from the current situation, it is unlikely to break through in the short term. Then the northeast area. The scout captain paused to let the lords around him digest the information, and said, including 3 mixed knight groups of the Black Blade Knights, 2 wizard groups, a big devil group, a mixed demon group of Peach Blossom Island, and 2 alliance groups composed of players, with a total force of 110,000. There are a large number of defensive troops stationed in all directions around the desolate city. Once we do not act as a whole and disperse, we are likely to be attacked by well-informed underground players. After listening to the latest report, the dozen lords did not see the joy of victory on their faces. They captured the desolate city, but found that they could not leave and were deeply trapped in it. This is undoubtedly sad. The Grand Justice Nibur standing at the front was the leader of the only priest group of the Eye of Judgment that went underground, and he led hundreds of priests. When the scout captain reported the latest information, Nibur then gently placed his hand on the table and said with a pleasant face, "Captain McFarland, now is not the time to mourn for Captain Hyena. The dead are gone, and we cannot succumb to evil. As the deputy commander, you need to take the responsibility of leading us away." Beside Nibur stood the young McFarland, who was less than 30 years old. As the leader of the 7th Knights, McFarland was also the 4th heir to the Empire. He was a prince. "Yes, thank you for your teachings." McFarland raised his head and answered respectfully, still thinking. Myrandal did not guide them to the road to victory. They needed to break through the dark blockade by themselves. There were 2 ornaments hanging on his chest, one was a dim round gem as heavy as the deep starry sky, and the other was a coat of arms ornament symbolizing the royal bloodline. Reaching out his hand and touching the 2 ornaments inadvertently, McFarland said, "There are 2 choices before us. The first is to continue fighting here, and the second is to find a new dark passage. And I will explain it to the Pope in person," Nibur explained slowly on the side. "In other words, the lords present will not bear the punishment for failing to complete the military order. They don't have to rush back to the surface world to participate in a war led by the emperor and proposed by several great lords. They can follow their own plans. Most of the players present are those who want to find a new dark passage. Of course they have their reasons. The first is that for this war, the players have investigated the topography of the underground world in detail and made sufficient preparations. Although the underground players are more cunning than them and are better at using formations, they believe that they can easily find new passages for large-scale movement with enough scouts. Another reason is that they don't want to have a bigger conflict with Dusk City, the largest underground player force in the north. The wealth of Dusk City is enviable, but that is just a fantasy in the players' minds. Yes, if Dusk City is looted, it will be enough for these players to obtain billions of war wealth, but the question is Dusk City really so easy to capture? After all, the main defense area of Dusk City is the city-centered defense, unlike the surrounding fortresses of Desolate City, which is more difficult to break through and infiltrate. Players express their opinions one after another. They used to be so high-spirited that they thought the underground world was vulnerable to the army of the Empire, and the capture of Desolate City made them even more satisfied. It came from a well-prepared and premeditated environment with favorable conditions. The siege of Desolate City was enough to be included in the classic battle examples for students in the military academy to learn. But now, their advantages are gone, and the players have lost the confidence to continue the siege. Of course, some people also proposed to continue the war. The man who stood up was a middle-aged man with a full beard. He was from the Arab world. The players didn't know his specific nationality. They only knew that this serious-looking man was a RMB warrior who was very keen on games. The cash he invested in games every month was as high as 400 million RMB. This man's net worth can withstand his spending. As a pioneer who realized the impact of the depletion of West Asian oil reserves on the Arab world, he had accumulated amazing wealth in new energy and military industry in his early years. Now he is a giant in the entire West Asian military industry, and his influence in both economy and politics is at its peak. In the virtual world, his name is Jin, and he also has another name -7-13. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Online game Dungeon Master. Author, Bulletin Lao Bulletin Si Bulletin Me. Chapter 386. Ladies and gentlemen. Jin shouted loudly, his eyes were deep and powerful, like a sharp sword that could pierce the hearts of players. Why are we retreating? What are we afraid of? He continued. In terms of economic strength, the Pharaoh Empire is enough to support this protracted war. In terms of military strength, our army is 10 times theirs. The most important thing is not to forget the teachings of Mirandar, and don't forget that the players in the south are watching us. Jin made a very detailed statement on the 3 reasons, which was no less than a wonderful impromptu speech. In summary, it can be summarized as follows. The first is the powerful strength of the Pharaoh Empire. There are 2 major empires on the continent. In fact, Saint Oteros is on the verge of division because of the incompetent emperor. The Pharaoh Empire is still young, and the emperor is in his prime, energetic, and has no powerful opponents. He can suppress others calmly. In terms of economic strength, the dungeon may be rich, but you have to understand that this is a deformed richness. In the traditional production industry, the dungeon will never be able to develop. Mushrooms and meat are difficult to adapt to the underground layer dominated by humans, while the surface can grow grains on a large scale, process flour, bake bread, and have convenient transportation and safe conditions to develop business. Except for a few large cities, the economy of the dungeon will always lag behind. In terms of the army, it is even worse. The dungeon is a strategy of elite soldiers. Because of the harsh environment and limited population, it is impossible to train a large number of weak soldiers. The surface has a rich population, often dozens of people feed one. With a base of tens of millions of people, it is enough to feed a million-man army. Surface players may not have many opportunities to experience real wars, but they are experienced in political struggles. Every player who has been awarded a title has stepped on other players to come to the stage, as if the real world is a bloodless war. Naturally, if the northern players lose, the southern players will inevitably oppress them. Sometimes, political struggles are more cruel than wars. How can players give southern players the opportunity to frame them? From Jin's words, we can hear his strong will to fight in the dungeon. His words inspired the confidence and ambition of some players who had been worn away. Through him, some players insisted on continuing the war, which made McFarland a little hesitant. There is no need to hesitate, my child. Let's ask for the opinion of Myrindal. Nibber beside him put forward his own opinion, and McFarland agreed immediately. In the camp, several priests stood together, chanted spells at the same time, and began to call Myrindal. Jin retreated after speaking, with a smile on his face. Behind him was a young man who was less than 20 years old. He had thick eyebrows and big eyes. He also had a code name called 13-9. Mr. Abdullah, is it really appropriate to do this? If the war continues, your soldiers will also be implicated, the young man asked puzzledly. His expression gave people a sense of honesty, but if they knew that this was the leader of the few remaining anti-government armed forces active in the Arab region, I am afraid no one would dare to believe it. Kawa. Jin approached him and chatted with him privately. You have been through so many things, and you should understand that the kingdom will eventually become the ultimate showdown between two major forces, gods and evil. The two are irreconcilable, and although we stand on the perspective of gods, we are fighting for evil. The sacrifice of the world of light does not represent the selfishness of that person. You must know that there is no business in the world that is guaranteed to make a profit. There are sacrifices and gains, and this is just a game. After Jin finished speaking, the young man named Kawa nodded as if he understood. They are all members of the gate. In the surface world, they are dust in the light. In the kingdom of the gods, the two main gods of the world of light symbolize light and justice respectively, and Myrindar is the master of justice, sitting in the highest building of the kingdom of gods, the Iron Palace that represents absolute justice. 16 temples surround the Iron Palace, which are subordinate gods of the main god Myrindal. Among them, the more famous ones include the god of bravery, the god of guardian, the god of war. Below the temple is a barren wilderness, full of wandering gods and holy spirits. The crystals symbolizing holiness support a total of 17 temples, allowing the gods to look down on all living things. When Chief Justice Nibber called on the players to follow Myrindal's instructions, a tiny thread of faith reached Myrindal's temple through the plain. As the hymns of praise became louder and louder, the thread began to burn and turned into a kind of nihilistic will. As if it was a prayer from the sufferers, Myrindal heard it. He used his terrible and extraordinary divine power to explore the kingdom of faith, countless worlds burning with the fire of justice, trying to find the source of his call. Unfortunately, because he released a level 18 divine spell to predict the future after the bloody battle, he still seemed a little weak. He did not notice that there was a special existence like a mirror at the edge of the plane that crossed the kingdom of God, swallowing up the prayers that should have belonged to the believers and turning them into a trace of fake power. This power was too real, so that the other 16 high beings did not notice the difference, but in front of Myrindar's eyes, no one could deceive him. He discovered the secret, and found that a tiny existence that he hated was forging his voice to deceive his believers. In the kingdom of God, a ripple like a storm immediately swept through the temples of the 16 gods in a short time. The gods knew that Myrindal was angry, and said in their hearts that the petty evil would be punished in front of Myrindal. That ripple turned into a 16th level divine spell, transformed into a beam of arrows, passed through countless overlapping and twisted spaces, and hit the ignorant who dared to deceive his believers. The golden light descended like the dawn, tearing apart the darkness. A 450,000 damage number appeared on the human body, and then a big blood hole appeared on his chest. The life value of up to 1 million continued to decrease at a rate of 20,000 per second. In just a few seconds, his body dissipated. Then, along with the voice calling him, it disappeared, and Myrandal fell into a deep sleep again. Tip: the incarnation of the player Lord died, losing 2.17 billion experience points. Summoning a new incarnation needs to be done after 6 hours. Shen Xian raised his head and looked at the kingdom of God in the distance. It was his incarnation that was just killed. Fortunately, he hid well and was not discovered by Myrandal. Standing at the top of the fallen temple, the nightmare commander Ymir laughed at him cunningly. "Mortal, very good, you are lucky to have contact with this god that mortals cannot challenge, but you are not dead." After he finished speaking, he pulled Myrandal's kingdom of God in and presented it in the sky above his head. "Complete your plan. As a master, I am glad that a tiny mortal has wisdom that exceeds that of the devil. At least, you can enjoy an interesting show before the end of the world. But you have to remember that evil is not omnipotent." The strange laughter echoed, and Shen Xian nodded. His body seemed to be in the fallen temple and in the desolate city. His voice was deliberately distorted by the system and became low and serious like a verdict. A hymn that made people feel empty in their hearts rang out in the sky. Looking at the kingdom of the gods again, it was like a collapsed dam, and disordered energy rushed down. This time, Myrandar woke up from his sleep again. The Iron Palace was surging with terrible pressure, and the silent kingdom of God was resounding with the roar of God. Then, the servants of God and the Holy Spirit knelt down one by one. Countless people felt the anger at that moment and the loss of faith. Above the desolate city camp, the voice of God bathed everyone's heart. It was not a kind teaching, but an encouragement before the war. Even the devout Nibur could not distinguish it. Shen Xian smiled slightly, and the divine power suddenly disappeared. Nibur was stunned, and then clenched his fists and shouted to the people below, "Continue the war." Online game Dungeon Master. Author, Bulletin Lao Bulletin Si Bulletin Me. Chapter 387. Appreciating the wonderful performance, the Lord of Hell Ymir was not unaware of Myrandal's anger. He was the most famous among the gods, and how many people could truly stand shoulder to shoulder with him? A deck of playing cards appeared in front of Ymir, as if a door had been opened. Each card depicted a strange pattern with deep meaning. Then, as the playing cards were scattered and arranged, countless blurred and dreamy spaces appeared in front of him, some of which were red, some were blue, overlapping each other, and blocking Myrandal in front of him. So, the terrible blow seemed to be absorbed or transferred, and finally did not enter the main material plane, but killed Shen Xian. And the Lord God would not personally punish a mortal, which would make him a shame to the gods. Shen Xian was saved. He took a breath. It was really thrilling just now. Although he did not believe that Ymir would sit back and watch him die, he had a deep understanding of the devil's fickleness and did not hold too much hope. A powerful god is omnipotent. If you want to use his name, you will be punished. It is even more difficult to deceive Myrandal and the mortals below, but he did it and completed the challenge. Ymir then asked him about the progress of the construction of the Sin Totem and let him leave, deceiving the players in the surface world. No one found that they encountered a big lie. They believed that Myrandal would support them. The war continued. The army of Dusk City would definitely not be stationed near the Dark Passage for a long time. That area was not the sphere of influence of Dusk City. When Dusk City withdrew its troops, the underground world could mobilize more soldiers for a protracted war. 2 days later, the underground players made plans not to evacuate anymore, so they calmly fought with the underground forces. There was no restriction on evacuating in a hurry, and the casualties of both sides gradually equalized. 2 days later, both sides suffered tens of thousands of casualties. The surface players lost an infantry legion and a guild legion, and the desolate city lost a knight group and a player alliance legion. The remaining casualties were not large. However, in general, the underground world is still superior, because the food carried and captured failed, and the surface players fell into a new difficulty, solving the food problem. The main solution is to force Dusk City to withdraw its troops and open up trade routes. As long as the surface world's caravans can enter the underground, the surface logistics problem no longer needs to be worried. Unfortunately, Dusk City seems unmoved. Even if it bribes a few players to use the reason that the trade between the two worlds is blocked, Dusk City still maintains a tough attitude. The number of troops stationed near the passage has always remained unchanged. The surface players once tried to launch a sneak attack, but unfortunately, because the terrain is relatively narrow and the geographical location here is quite important and cannot be destroyed, several actions failed. The surface players also refused to surrender and continued to fight. A few days later, food and military supplies were transported through the newly discovered dark passage, and new soldiers were transported. The war, which had been easing due to the shortage of troops, became hot and cruel again. At this point, the war between the two sides has changed from 1/3 of the players in the north to a full-scale war involving hundreds of thousands of players in the north due to the manipulation of some people. Both sides have invested a lot of manpower and material resources. Because of Myrandal's support, no one thinks this is a meaningless war. Players transported the captured underground treasures to transform them into capital for the army to fight, while some players proposed a new solution: players who control underground forces and support certain players who are close to the surface, so that they can buy underground minerals cheaply. They only need to pay for daily necessities such as food, which is quite good and cheap. Of course, it is difficult to do so. Except for a few major forces who can use their real-life relationships to conduct this trade, ordinary players cannot do it. And the current war can no longer be easily resolved. With the desolate city as the center, radiating to all directions, it is not easy to reach a secret agreement on millions of square kilometers of land. According to the prediction of professional players, this war is likely to evolve into the longest war in the country, a bitter battle. Freedom, Pojo World, and other world-famous guilds successively issued declarations of war against the underground world. Later, in response, Cry, Peach Blossom Island, and Dusk City also issued information accepting the declaration of war. The war between the two sides became formal and public. So, in the following week, every player spent the war in the midst of war. The North became a new leveling point welcomed by the majority of adventurers and players. As long as they were alive, their levels were rising rapidly. There were also many discordant voices, such as this war represented a deeper conspiracy of the underground city, etc., because there was no sufficient evidence, there were few believers. No one knew what role Dusk City played in the war. Of course, Shenxian was very clear. The surface forces and the underground forces have always maintained peace, which will lead to the failure of the Sunset God cult to develop and the goal of Dusk City to be too prominent. This is a test facing Dusk City, and if the contradictions are diverted and the players' perspectives are shifted to other things, things will obviously turn around. After several weeks, the spread of the Sunset Cult achieved very outstanding results. The refugees and orphans brought by the war were the most vulnerable in their faith. They often felt desperate about life and were therefore easy to convert to God. Dusk City had no shortage of food and places to accommodate refugees, so the number of believers increased all of a sudden. Players also no longer consider the consequences and countermeasures of Twilight City's dominance in the north. For players, what they should pay more attention to is how to resolve the relationship with the players on the surface. Twilight City thus developed away from the war, with only half of the army fighting the enemy at all times, which was a means of training the army. You must know that although Twilight City seemed to be deeply involved in the war, the players around Desolate City who were actually the victims had the main battlefield there, so how could the players develop with peace of mind? Not only that, during this idle period, the Sunset Cult in the other plane also launched a new religious war, uniting the 400,000 troops of the 7 southern countries and the hundreds of thousands of undead legions belonging to Tongji Club to jointly challenge the Earth Cult in the north. The result of the war was gratifying. The Earth Cult was not as strong as imagined. After a week of war in reality, 1/3 of the world in the other plane became the parish of the Sunset Cult, and about 20 million people became believers. With Shen Xian's current strength, it was enough to make him no longer restricted by the contract. And the war between the underground and the surface has not yet ended. August has passed. The war between the Saint Otero's Empire and the Southern Orcs ended after half a year. Even so, the weakening of the royal power became an unstoppable trend. The 4 great lords seemed to foreshadow a possible future, 4 independent kingdoms divided and ruled. Online game Dungeon Master. Author, Buletin Lao Buletin Si Buletin Me. Chapter 388. At the beginning of the month, the weather turned cooler, and the whole of Shanghai was bleak. The construction progress of the Sin Totem was 27.2%. The dark underground Dusk City still maintained its aloof and arrogant attitude in the northern part of the continent. Even though he didn't know what the 3 masters were planning, Shen Xian could still guess that it might be a big plan to invade the surface world. Although the territory became larger and larger, the difficulties faced became more and more, and it was often extremely difficult to continue to grow. This time was only enough for Dusk City to take back all the territories seized by Nihilum, and announced in a high-profile manner that the player's territory was under the rule of Dusk City. With the title of Marquis and the internal permission from the Fallen Temple, the integration work went quite smoothly, because the relationship within the elves was used, and the 2 collaborators slightly dealt with the Gaul Macho. Even though this wretched uncle often did not play by the rules, he still had to shrink back to deal with the affairs within the kingdom. The number of territories has been successfully increased to 3,000. Unfortunately, because they are buildings of the elves, they need to be raised and rebuilt, so the actual benefits are not many, and it will take some time to manifest. Another gratifying thing is that the books left by the elemental gate have been cracked, and the first-level material conversion technology has been realized. As a result, Dusk City has surpassed the ordinary city. There is no need to monotonously mine minerals, cut wood, and grow food. All materials can be obtained by relying on alchemy technology, even gold. Of course, the loss of the first-level technology is relatively large. Alchemy is called equivalent exchange, which is essentially no different from smelting metals, and there will be a lot of material and energy consumption. The most important benefit of this technology is the free conversion of items, and the specific rules are relatively complex. It is definitely not operated according to scientific concepts such as atoms and molecules in reality. The sale of all the scarce materials in Dusk City will be released. In fact, this kind of thing is more suitable to become a killer for commodity monopoly. On the outside, 3 companies announced that they would enter Dusk City to act as agents for some important affairs. The first one is Baiyun Club, which is a company engaged in a very complex industry, involving multiple branch industries such as weddings, tourism, celebrations, and healthcare. Its main market is the virtual world. For example, players have a great demand for a fantasy wedding in the kingdom, or visit the Fallen Temple, and it is not so easy to level up in the kingdom, so such a company was born. Baiyun Club is controlled by the door, and its annual net profit is about 10 billion. The second one is an accounting firm, whose main purpose is to help players manage their territories in the virtual world, so as to avoid huge amounts of property losses due to temporary decision-making errors. An accounting firm is a branch of the Lock Consortium. Only 1/3 of the firm's business is in the virtual world, and its status cannot be underestimated. The third one is Rox Group. The first two companies announced to the public that they had invested in the embrace of Dusk City after a long negotiation with the Lord of Dusk City. It was quite high profile as a kind of publicity. In fact, the investment of each company was almost all above 9 figures, which was also eye-catching when measured in numbers. The Rocks Group is much more low-key, because it does not belong to Shen Xian's camp. Even with Yan Yao's existence, the Rocks Group is still an important investment part of Raven, controlling the flow of tens of billions of funds, and is also the dream of countless college students. Rocks only proposed to establish a small number of offices in Dusk City to understand the price changes of gold and other rare materials. The participation of several large companies made many players jealous. In fact, this is not something to be happy about. The advantage is that no one wants to offend the big companies that can make clouds and rain in reality, which will reduce many enemies in Dusk City. The disadvantage is that many big companies will try every means to divide the rights once they enter the game, weakening the influence of the Lord. It can be said that there are both good and bad. In the human world at the western end of the continent, in a secret magician tower. Following the system of round table meetings, countless books were placed against the walls of the circular hall, and on the rare magic leather carpet was a large mahogany carved table, wrapped with lead edges engraved with runes. Several players wearing robes, some wearing white clothes, and some wearing armor sat together. Tomorrow. The man named Sun gently touched the black crystal ball on the table. After a few seconds, a scene of war and chaos appeared in front of the players. Tomorrow is the time for a coup. We are not the protagonists. Unfortunately, 50% of the country's rights will be returned to heaven. Sun pointed to the crystal ball, and the perspective slowly rose, finally presenting a full picture of the country of Saint Otero's empire at the western end of the continent. Things have been arranged, and the players around them have long known that for them, all they have to do is wait for that time to come. At that time, the old emperor should be sent to the gallows, and the entire empire will fall into a new disaster. The four lords brought hope to the common people, and then dragged them into the pain of war. How ironic! However, for the players, the matter had little to do with them. Sun sat down. He did not see the lovely sheep, did not find the charlatan hummer, and many players from heaven did not appear here. But it did not matter. He walked a few steps and finally sat down. Do you know the ultimate mission of the kingdom? When the technology was transferred, both parties left a mutually recognized code to start the ultimate mission. Maybe it's too early to talk about this, because it will take another year or two to get to the ultimate mission, but through prophecy, we can get some hidden information in the game. Son, do you know anything? A player asked immediately below. I don't know, it's just a branch mission of the pre-task of the ultimate mission. It's a bit difficult to pronounce, but the mission prompt is like this. Sun smiled, the information was provided to us by the Order Association. Although I don't know whether the existence above the god is awake, I think we'd better go and take a look. The mission location is in a world forgotten by the gods where the Dragonvein Association and the Sunset God cult are active recently. This is a world of half undead and half human. We have two choices: help the Lord defeat the Pale Hand, or form an alliance with the Pale Hand and drive the two churches out of this world. After all, our clown also needs faith, right? We need a guardian standing on a high place, otherwise, this war is meaningless. The Order Association's teleportation array will be set up in a few days, and we will need a few volunteers by then. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Online game Dungeon Master. Author, Bulletin Lao Bulletin Si Bulletin Me. Chapter 389. As the old beliefs of the other planes are replaced, the war gradually subsides, the pain caused by the war will gradually heal over time, and the believers will return to normal life. The expelled gods will not keep their eyes on one corner for a long time, their goal will be the endless billions of planes. In a world covered with leaden clouds, the ocean is always roaring with angry waves, and the messengers of the storm god patrol day and night, bringing disasters and pain to mortals. In the depths of the storm is a crescent-shaped narrow continent, like an isolated utopia, where countless humans live. The only difference is that this continent rarely has sunlight, and most of the time it is shrouded in dimness, which is not a paradise for humans. Atago, located in the east of the continent, is a medium-sized country of necromancers with a population of about 8 million. This is a wizard country ruled by the demigod necromancer Dulma. The necromancer is actually the opposite of the god of death. The soul needs to return to the underworld and the world of the god of death, but the necromancer blasphemes the dead, causing their souls to wander in this world. Therefore, this is a place where faith is despised and the church has difficulty surviving. Of course, this is only for the pale hand of the god of the dead. For the church that supports Dulma, Dulma still adopts a relatively tolerant policy. On September 11, in a place surrounded by mountains and dense jungles, the desperate mercenary Narvash was chased by local nobles and had to run to this place full of disordered dead spirits. The desolate sound of bone dragons resounded everywhere. In an environment that was more terrifying than the night, a voice that seemed to be an ancient god entered his heart. He was a little surprised, and gradually Narvash regained his calm. Mortals cannot despise gods, so he patiently listened to the words of the self-proclaimed dragon god. After thinking about it, he finally decided to become one of his believers. There is never a lack of talents in the church of an old god, and talented people are often not reused. Narvash himself has no faith, but under the condition that the dragon god promised to save him, he decided to follow the new god to re-establish the order of the gods. His decision was not wrong. He fell into the forest with a thunderbolt that seemed like a divine punishment. Dozens of mercenaries chasing him died or were trapped by the raging fire. He then learned that he had a quarter of dragon blood flowing in his body, so at level 47, he could become a giant in the Dragon Vein Society in this plane. Narvash readily agreed and accepted the test given to him by God. A month later, he walked out of the forest. On September 13, Narvash, level 62, successfully avenged and killed the noble scum who persecuted him. Since then, he has completely believed in the dragon god, the mysterious new dragon god named Kalando. Narvash is wise. He designed the structure of the church and found a camp of dead light dragon people under the guidance of the gods and took them in as his subordinates. The same thing happened in the north of Atago, in a place called Thorny Tundra. A young boy named Milo was taken to a cave by sheep while grazing for the local lord. He got a black magic notebook from there, and he learned about his life experience. He was the crystallization of the Nether Banshee and the Hell Knight, and he was extraordinary since birth. Milo himself is a hero-level NPC, so he leveled up quickly with his attribute advantages. He also got an epic staff given by Evil Shadow. A few days later, 12-year-old Milo escaped from the clutches of the local lord with his level 39 strength, established an organization called the Sunset Society, and recruited a group of orphans as his deputies. By September 18, the scale of the Sunset Society had expanded to more than 500 people, becoming a special group that mainly studied dark faction magic. They believed in evil gods, first kidnapped several local nobles, used them as blood sacrifices in exchange for power, and then massacred a village, turning the villagers into experimental subjects for studying dark spells. The incident did not attract the attention of the lords. The country ruled by Dulma was a place where terrorist incidents often occurred. For the lords, as long as the incident was not serious, they could basically be indifferent. The kingdom of the dragon god Kalando. In a magnificent palace, Chris was lying on the throne, surrounded by hundreds of millions of gold and jewels. Several silver dragons that he had kidnapped to serve him stood on both sides in human form. Shen Xian stood on one side, and the two were almost equal in status. The Dragon Vein Society has taken root in the main material plane, and the number of believers has reached 2 million. In this plane, the Dragon Vein Society and the Sunset God cult will jointly develop it. I believe it will not take too long to collect all the beliefs. Chris said with confidence. His god name is Kalando. Of course, in his kingdom of God, he still uses his human name when talking to Shen Xian. The two major churches jointly developed this corner forgotten by the gods. Several members of the gate believed that it was not difficult and would not take too long. They gained the initial believers by showing miracles, and then they accumulated power and fought a war with the Pale Hand in the south to divide the diocese. Although this is the case, because of the sensitivity of evil, Shen Xian still gets some information about crises from the system from time to time when he is asleep in the game. This information is half true and half false, which can play a significant role. From the analysis of two special dreams in the past few days, he feels that it is not as easy as he imagined to open up this plane. The first dream was about the soul center. It seemed that there was a copy in this world. Although he didn't know who had it, the dream told him that it was in the southeast corner of the continent, and there would be competitors. The second was about the alliance of the two churches. The enemy they encountered was not only the Pale Hand, but also unpredictable new enemies who would hinder their plans. Therefore, Shen Xian reminded, "Don't let your guard down. We finally got the spatial coordinates and found that there is such a place. We can't give it to others. Who can fight against the great Chris? Unless it is Clown, but is it worth it to have a conflict now?" Chris didn't believe it. Thinking, his avatar went to Atago through the kingdom of God to guide his believers. Shen Xian could only shake his head and appeared beside Milo in the form of an avatar. He sent him a level 90 big devil, which was enough for him to handle ordinary things. He guided Milo to build a demonic spire to absorb faith, complete contracts, and perform rituals. Each religious building would be connected to the great temple in the deepest part of Dusk City and transformed into mysterious power for him to study and use. Online game DungeonMaster. Author, Buledin Lao Buledin Si Buledin Me. Chapter 390. It is difficult to grow crops on a large scale in the desolate north, and about half of the residents need to make a living by dangerous hunting, which makes the population here small and the territory difficult to prosper. More than 500 territories belong to a player named Lao Ke, and behind the player he has a secret code called 12-89. Under the protection of Lao Ke, Sunset will gradually grow. Under the arrangement of Shen Xian, Milo led his assistants to build evil energy spires in several special places in the territory. Each evil energy spire is engraved with a unique mark to symbolize the evil territory. In this way, other churches will not easily attack it when they see it. As long as the two sides do not invade each other, they can cooperate with each other. In 3 days, Shen Xian helped Milo reach level 50. Milo then went to the home of a declining lord with a forged identity certificate of a noble illegitimate son and inherited the entire family business of this poor noble without children. With the help of Shen Xian, things were of course extremely smooth. With the observation of Lao Ke, no one was willing to jump out to intervene or obstruct. Milo obtained more than 20 territories in a blink of an eye and became a noble. He built a temple in the second stage of the territory in the town for secret activities and a research institute for studying black magic. He then set up a patrol team to maintain the safety of the town and the territory, and placed his own people in it. After operating secretly for several months, on September 22, the temple completed the third stage upgrade. He recruited several priests to preach to the outside world. Because the town's security work was done well and he had an unshakable position in the local area, the number of believers quickly grew to more than 3,000. The next step for the Sunset Society is to register in the kingdom to confirm its legal status. There are dozens of religious groups like this in Atago, and there are no problems. During this period, Shen Xian searched in the large library of the Fallen Temple and found 2 professions suitable for this plane: the Sleeper and the Soul Eater. Sleepers are a profession that focuses on negative state protection. Unlike spellbreakers who are almost invincible against mages of the same level, sleepers have little achievement in magic defense. They do not have magic resistance figures as high as 60% or 70%, but they still have the ability to protect against physical negative states such as toxins and bleeding. Relying on matching talents and skills, sleepers can survive calmly in relatively harsh environments and are not afraid of the curse of the undead mage. Another point is that they have a talent that consumes half the food. This means that sleepers do not consume much food and will easily form a huge number. This is a first-turn profession. Another Soul Eater has two talents. The first one can obtain the talent template of the Little Devil. By killing the enemy, you can get some of the enemy's experience to quickly upgrade. The second one is the Undead Killer, which can get an additional 20% damage when encountering the undead. This first-turn profession is more suitable for frontal warfare, especially when fighting against the undead. It has a great advantage under the condition of equal numbers. Both professions are tailor-made by Shen Xian for the Sunset Club and can fully adapt to the laws of this plane. After setting up two professions, it is time to promote them and receive professional training. There are Twilight Chanters, but as the backbone of the church, the number of Twilight Chanters does not need to be large. They should either be at the top or at the bottom. The chance of them appearing as teaching soldiers is not great. After a few days of development, on September 24, Shen Xian ordered Milo to establish a tribunal to adjudicate heresy. Small conflicts are very frequent in this forgotten plane. Through the tribunal, taboo research and bloody massacres can be carried out openly, without giving others an excuse to attack themselves. Then there are two branch temples. The trained believers went there to preach, and finally the power of the Sunset Society finally expanded rapidly. A few days later, dozens of priests of the church quietly sneaked into the four surrounding small countries to open up new parishes. According to local policies and situations, targeted development should be carried out. Temples should be built in each place, either in the city or in the wild. In a short period of time, the number of believers in this plane increased to tens of thousands. Atago is a place suitable for small churches to survive. Dulma does not allow too powerful forces to appear, so if they want to develop further, they need to jump out of Atago. On the other hand, the Dragonvein Association has achieved similar development with him. Both sides have entered the attention list of mainstream forces on the continent and have frequent exchanges with other forces such as the Chamber of Commerce and the Mage Tower. At this time, an important thing happened. The south is the base camp of the Pale Hand. There are tens of millions of believers who believe in the god of death. The church is unprecedentedly powerful and will conquer the north from time to time. A large regional mission, such events are world missions when they occur in the main material plane, almost many forces and kingdoms will participate. One day, the war began. Both sides stationed in the area of Falling Star Lake and fought hard. This is a way to quickly cultivate the power of the church. How to participate and how to achieve good results have become the key issues for Shen Xian and Chris to think about. Under the night sky, more than 300,000 troops are stationed on the charming Falling Star Lake. Most of the surrounding players have participated. Under the leadership of the local number 1 guild, South African Star, they fought a desperate battle with the church soldiers in the south. The camps of the two major churches were adjacent to each other, and they dispatched 50,000 church soldiers. Even though they had only been newly trained, their combat strength was quite impressive. Old K's overall ranking is quite high, and Shen Xian has given him a lot of technical subsidies, which has accelerated the training speed of the trainees and enabled them to wear finely crafted leather armor. Therefore, the average level 30 trainees can compete with other soldiers over 40. Milo stood in the camp. He was level 68 and he was still a child. With the help of the big devil, no one was willing to disobey his orders. Beside him stood a group of teenagers, all of whom were elites. From their eyes, Milo's reputation was quite high. A little further away stood a player named Young and Youthful. The player was a lewd player. Milo was not very good at commanding. It was precisely because of his help that he did not suffer too much loss in the past few days. Young and Youthful was not a member of the section he joined because he heard the name of the Sunset Cult and deduced something from the relationship between the two, and took the initiative to strongly request to join. However, Milo's expression was not very good. In recent days, a new opponent appeared in the south. A mysterious force that drove a large number of mercenaries to participate in the war. The average level of the opponent was above 50. With the exquisite command of the players, they made up for the disadvantage of insufficient numbers and caused them huge casualties. The opponent adopted the method of elite strikes, specifically entering the northern camp to encircle and command. The players were fine, and the NPCs could not be revived after they died. However, the opponent had a very good grasp of the players' psychology, which made many players helpless. Even the players of South Africa Star, one of the several well-known guilds in Africa, cursed and condemned them on the forum.